Story number 1.
Of all the trips I've taken, the cruise in 2018 still plays in my head like a movie I can't shut off. I was 27, recently promoted at work, and needed a break. I chose a solo cruise on a mid-sized ship called the Ocean Valiant. Not as flashy as the modern megaliners, but it had a certain charm. The cruise was heading through the Caribbean, stopping at several islands. It was supposed to be a relaxing week on the ocean. It turned out to be something else entirely. I boarded in Miami on a sunny afternoon. The ship had just enough passengers to feel lively without being crowded. The staff greeted me warmly, and the ship's interiors had a vintage nautical elegance. Brass railings, wood-paneled lounges, porthole windows. I was in a lower deck cabin, not quite below the waterline, but close enough to hear the churn of the ocean outside. It had a queen bed, a small TV, a round porthole, and a compact bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it suited me. The first day went smoothly. I unpacked, explored the ship, had a cocktail on the deck, and even joined a trivia game in the lounge. That night, I slept easily. But it was the second night when things began to shift, subtly at first. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange tapping sound. It wasn't loud, just persistent, like something rapping on the metal frame of the porthole. I assumed it was water or wind, but when I got up to check, the sea outside was calm. Moonlight danced on the surface, and the sky was clear. The tapping stopped as I approached. I brushed it off and went back to sleep. The next morning, I asked the guest services desk if other passengers had reported anything odd, like noises from the ship's hull or portholes. The young woman at the desk, dressed in crisp navy blue, smiled politely and said no, though I sensed a flicker of something in her expression. Concern? Recognition? That night, the tapping came again, this time accompanied by a faint rhythmic sound, like humming. It was just outside the porthole, muffled by the thick glass and the barrier of the sea, but undeniably human. My skin prickled. I pressed my ear to the porthole and listened. The melody was fragmented, tuneless. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the ship's hull reverberating or some kind of underwater current playing tricks with sound. But it felt wrong. The next morning, I skipped breakfast and went straight to the library on deck 5. I wasn't the only one seeking silence. An older gentleman sat at the corner table with a stack of books. I scanned the shelves and picked out a small volume about maritime superstitions. Mostly it was folklore, ghost ships, sea monsters, drowned sailors. One passage caught my eye. It mentioned sea whispers, a legend about voices heard from the water, usually tied to areas with shipwreck histories. According to the book, the phenomenon was often dismissed as auditory hallucinations due to stress or isolation. But I wasn't stressed, and I wasn't isolated. Not then. By the fourth night, things escalated. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it again, this time louder, clearer. A woman's voice, not humming, speaking. It was just a few words. I froze as the voice drifted through the porthole like fog. "Let me in." My hand trembled, toothpaste, dribbling from my mouth. I stared at the porthole. There was nothing outside but black water. I backed away, heart pounding. "Let me in." I slept with the lights on that night, clutching the cruise pamphlet in my hand like it could protect me. I considered asking to change rooms, but I couldn't explain what I was hearing without sounding insane. I started looking more closely at the other passengers, wondering if anyone else felt it. At dinner, I met a woman named Carla, friendly, talkative, maybe in her mid-40s. She was traveling with her sister, but I noticed she seemed unusually alert, almost guarded. We struck up a conversation, and after some small talk, I asked, "Have you noticed anything weird at night?" She stared at me for a second too long before replying. "What do you mean?" "Sounds," I said carefully, "like outside the ship." Her lips tightened. She leaned in slightly. "You heard her too?" My heart skipped. "Her?" Carla nodded slowly. "My sister thinks I'm imagining it, but I've been hearing a voice every night. First it was humming, then words, asking to come inside." I felt a jolt of fear and relief. "Yes," I whispered. "Same here." We agreed to meet later that night, around 1 a.m., near the rear observation deck, one of the quieter, more isolated spots on the ship. We sat together on a bench, watching the black waves roll endlessly beneath us. At first, nothing happened. Then, around 1:45, the air grew colder. Not just breeze cold, it was like stepping into a freezer. Carla rubbed her arms, then we heard it. Clear, feminine, drifting over the water. "Let me in." This time it came from somewhere below, beneath the deck, under the waterline. We both stood at the same time, peering over the railing, but the sea was empty. The voice came again, this time closer. Carla gasped and grabbed my arm. "Do you see that?" I looked down where she pointed. In the water, about 10 feet from the ship, something pale moved just below the surface. A shape, woman-like. It was impossible to make out features, but the impression was there. Hair drifting like seaweed, limbs too long, face pale and smooth. Then it was gone. We didn't say anything for a long time. Eventually, we went back to our cabins, both shaken and unsure what to do next. The following day, I tried to ask one of the cleaning staff about the ship's history. He was a tall man in his 30s, seemed friendly. When I brought up the question casually, his face went stiff. "This ship," he paused, glanced around. "It had another name before, was sold to a new company a few years back." "What was it called?" He hesitated. "La Sirena del Mar." Spanish. "There was an incident. A woman jumped overboard. Some say she was pushed, never found." I pressed him for more, but he shook his head and walked away. That night I didn't sleep. The tapping came earlier, louder. It moved from the porthole to the wall near my headboard, then to the bathroom mirror. That's when I saw it. In the mirror behind my reflection, a pale shape hovered. It looked like a woman, but the features were blurred, as if she were underwater. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. I turned around fast. No one was there. When I looked back at the mirror, it was gone. I didn't stay in my room after that. I threw on shoes and went straight to Carla's cabin. She let me in without hesitation. Her face was pale. "She was at our door," she said, knocking. We decided to talk to the ship's captain. We rehearsed what we'd say, how we'd sound concerned but not crazy. But when we got to the bridge, we were told the captain wasn't available. A stern first officer took our complaint, writing things down with a look that said he'd heard nonsense before. We never heard back. The rest of the cruise was a blur. More voices, more sightings, always fleeting, always just enough to make you question your sanity. Other passengers started to look uneasy too. Some avoided eye contact, a few whispered to staff. One family disembarked early at a port and didn't return. On the final night, the storm hit. Winds tore across the deck, rain lashed the windows, and the ship rocked harder than at any point in the trip. I huddled in Carla's cabin with her and her sister. Around 3 a.m., during a lull in the storm, the emergency lights flickered. Then the knocking started again. But this time, it wasn't outside. It came from the hallway. Heavy, slow knocks moving down the corridor, then scratching at the door. Carla's sister screamed and backed into the corner. The doorknob turned. We all stared as it rattled slightly. Then silence. No one opened it. When we dared look through the peephole, the hall was empty. Not even a wet footprint. The next morning, the storm was gone. The sea was calm. The sun returned like nothing had happened. Passengers disembarked quietly, grateful to be on land. I didn't even look back at the Ocean Valiant. I took a cab from the port and didn't stop shaking until I reached the airport. Weeks later, I tried researching La Sirena del Mar. I found a few vague mentions: a defunct cruise line, an accident, a woman overboard in 2013. The body was never recovered. Some rumors claimed the woman had been seen after her death, walking the lower decks, tapping on doors, appearing in mirrors. One forum post chilled me to the bone. It said, "If you ever hear a voice asking to come in, don't answer, don't look, and whatever you do, never open the door." I've never taken another cruise. I don't think I ever will. Story the end.
Story number 2.
The cruise ship set sail from Miami on a humid June afternoon, slicing through the Atlantic like a gleaming white blade. It was a massive vessel with 15 decks, multiple pools, restaurants, theaters, and luxury suites. My girlfriend, Melissa, had surprised me with the tickets for our 2-year anniversary. She knew I didn't love the ocean, but she said I needed to loosen up. Just 1 week, she had pleaded. Sun, cocktails, dancing, and no stress. We boarded the ship, the Emerald Odyssey, and were immediately swept into the luxury of it all. Staff in crisp uniforms greeted us with smiles and flutes of champagne. Steel drums played softly in the background. Everything gleamed. The passengers were mostly couples and families, excitedly chattering about shore excursions, spa appointments, and dinner reservations. Our room was on the 10th deck, starboard side, and had a small private balcony that overlooked the ocean. It was more spacious than I expected. King-size bed, small sofa, a flat-screen TV, and a bathroom with polished chrome fittings. Melissa squealed when she saw the towel folded into a swan on the bed. The first 2 days passed in a blur of sunshine and buffets. I tried to relax, really tried. Melissa was thriving. She danced during the live shows, drank pina coladas by the pool, made friends with a Canadian couple from Deck 7. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the unease. It wasn't seasickness. I'd taken Dramamine and felt physically fine, but there was something about being out in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from land, that gnawed at me. I kept waking in the night, disoriented, with the distinct feeling that something wasn't right. On the third night, things began to shift. It started with a noise in the corridor outside our room. A thudding sound. I checked my phone. 3:12 a.m. I got up quietly, trying not to wake Melissa, and tiptoed to the door. I peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the thudding came again, closer now and wet sounding, almost like someone dragging something heavy and soaked across the carpet. I opened the door slightly and looked out. Nothing. I stepped into the corridor barefoot, listening. The hallway lights flickered slightly, which I hadn't noticed before. I turned left, walking past 3 other cabin doors. The ship creaked around me as it shifted slightly in the water. I saw a smear dark wet on the wall near the ice machine alcove. I moved closer. It was a long streak of something that looked like seawater, but there was a reddish tint to it. I touched it, sticky, not water. Blood? I looked around quickly, heart hammering. Still no one. I heard a soft splash, like someone slipping into a pool. The hallway ended at a stairwell door. I opened it slowly. It was cool and dim inside. As I stepped in, I heard the door behind me slam shut. I jumped and spun around. Nothing. I decided to go back to the room. Maybe I was dreaming or overtired. Melissa was still asleep when I returned, breathing softly. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to collect myself. I didn't want to alarm her. The blood, if that's what it was, could have come from someone who cut themselves. The cruise had over 3,000 people on board. Accidents happen. But I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I reported the smear to a crew member in the atrium. He gave me a professional nod and promised to have someone look into it. I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. Maybe he thought I was drunk. I didn't push it. Later, as we were walking back to our room after breakfast, we passed the same area by the ice machine. It was spotless. The wall had been wiped clean, not even a trace. I leaned in close and noticed the wallpaper near the baseboard looked slightly different, like it had been scrubbed or maybe recently repaired. Melissa asked me what I was doing, and I told her I thought I saw a weird stain last night. She laughed and told me I was being paranoid. That night, I was awoken again. This time, I wasn't alone. Melissa was sitting up in bed, wide-eyed, staring at the foot of the bed. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I sat up quickly. "See what?" There was someone standing there, right there. She pointed to the foot of the bed. It looked like a woman, wet, like soaked through. I thought it was a joke, but then she just disappeared. My heart dropped. We turned on all the lights and searched the room. Nothing. The door was still locked. The balcony was shut tight. Melissa was shaking. We barely slept after that. The next morning, we went to the guest services desk. I demanded to speak with security. A stern-looking man in a white shirt and epaulettes named Officer Hall met with us in a small conference room near the theater. I told him everything about the hallway, the blood smear, the wet thudding sounds, and the woman Melissa had seen. He listened politely, then gave us a thin smile. "Mr. and Miss Porter, I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you there have been no injuries or missing persons reported aboard the Emerald Odyssey. We do have CCTV coverage in most public areas, and nothing unusual was noted last night on Deck 10. "But what about our room?" Melissa asked. "We do not have cameras inside passenger cabins, for obvious privacy reasons. However, our security teams patrol all decks regularly." He stood and thanked us for our report, offering a bottle of wine and a voucher for a massage as a goodwill gesture. It felt like a brush-off. Back in our cabin that afternoon, Melissa searched online for cruise ship ghost stories. She found a few vague articles, mostly sensationalized blogs, but one Reddit post caught her eye. It was nearly a year old, from a user claiming to have sailed on the Emerald Odyssey and witnessed something similar. He described a soaked woman appearing in his cabin on the 10th deck, the sound of dragging footsteps, and a cold presence in the stairwells at night. The post ended abruptly. No follow-up. The account was deleted. Melissa's face turned pale as she read it aloud. That evening, after dinner, we went to the lounge for drinks. I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to the hallway outside the windows, the shadows flickering between the shuffleboard courts and empty sun loungers. I kept expecting to see someone, a soaked figure lurking just out of view. Around 11 p.m., we headed back to the room. The hallway was deserted. The carpet muffled our steps. I saw a fresh smear, barely visible, but it was there. Another wet streak, this time along the floor by the baseboard. Melissa saw it too. She didn't say anything. Back in the room, we turned on every light. Melissa refused to take a shower. "What if that's how she got in?" she whispered. I sat on the couch and flipped through the TV channels. Nothing helped. The air in the room felt heavier than usual, like the pressure dropped. Around midnight, the lights flickered. The TV screen went black, then flashed white, then showed static. I stood, heart thumping, and grabbed the phone to call the front desk. The phone was dead. Then we heard it, a slow dragging sound. From inside the room, we both turned toward the bathroom. The door was open slightly. The light was off. Water was dripping. Drip, drip, drip. I took a step forward. Melissa clutched my arm. "No," she whispered. "Don't." But I couldn't stop. I walked to the bathroom and pushed the door open. It was empty, but the floor was soaked. Water pooled around the drain, spreading to the edges of the room. The shower curtain hung limp and wet, dripping slowly. The mirror was fogged. Written in the condensation were 3 words, "Still not saved." I backed away slowly, bile rising in my throat. That night we didn't sleep. We left the lights on and sat up until dawn. In the morning, we went straight to the guest services desk and demanded to change rooms. They offered us a suite on deck 12. We took it. The new room was dry, clean, normal. We tried to put it behind us. 2 more nights. That's all we had left. But it wasn't over. On the second to last night, we were walking back from the late comedy show. Deck 10 was quiet. We passed a young woman standing barefoot in the hallway near our old room. She was drenched. Her hair hung in wet strings across her face. Her cruise ID badge was missing. Her clothes clung to her skin and her arms hung limp at her sides. Her eyes were dark, bottomless. Melissa gasped. I froze. The woman opened her mouth as if to scream, but no sound came. Just water. A slow trickle, then a surge, pouring out of her mouth like a fountain. She reached toward us. We turned and ran. We didn't stop until we were in our new room, door bolted, chest heaving. The next morning we packed our bags and waited in the atrium for disembarkation. We didn't speak much. Other passengers chatted happily around us. No one else seemed affected. No one else seemed aware. As we left the ship and walked down the gangway into the bright Florida sun, I looked back. The 10th deck balconies gleamed in the morning light, and on the far end, barely visible, stood the soaked woman watching us leave. Story, the end.
Story number 3.
The cruise was supposed to be a celebration. My sister Lisa had just gotten promoted, and I had some time off work, so we booked a 7-day trip through the Caribbean. It wasn't one of those party cruises. It was smaller, classier, marketed toward adults who wanted a peaceful vacation with live jazz and art lectures. The ship, the Maribel, was an older liner restored in a vintage 1960s style. Lots of polished wood, brass fixtures, velvet upholstery, and narrow corridors that twisted in strange angles. From the first moment we boarded, something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just off. The air was strangely still, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. No children laughing, no clatter of suitcases or casual chatter from guests. The staff was polite but reserved, as if trying not to draw attention to themselves. I noticed a lot of them avoided looking directly at guests unless spoken to. Our cabin was on deck 7, near the stern. It was smaller than expected, with twin beds and an old porthole that had been painted shut. The light switch clicked, but didn't always respond immediately. There was a narrow closet and an old rotary phone mounted to the wall, which we found funny at first. We dropped off our bags and went exploring. That first night, after dinner and a show in the velvet-draped lounge, we returned to our cabin to find the door wide open. Nothing had been taken or disturbed, but I was sure I'd locked it. Lisa thought maybe the lock didn't work properly. She even joked that maybe the ghost of some 1960s passenger had come back to smoke a cigarette and listen to jazz. We laughed, shut the door, and double locked it. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up freezing. Not cold like the AC was too strong, freezing. I could see my breath when I exhaled. I turned to tell Lisa to adjust the thermostat, but her bed was empty. I sat up, heart jumping. The bathroom door was closed, so I called out, "Lisa?" No answer. I knocked on the bathroom door. No sound. I opened it, empty. That's when I noticed her slippers were gone. So were her keycard and her phone. I figured maybe she couldn't sleep and went to get tea or something, but the idea of her walking alone through the ship at that hour didn't sit right. I threw on a hoodie, slipped on shoes, and left the cabin. The halls were empty. Completely empty. I checked the lounge, dark. The cafe, closed. Even the atrium, usually lit with soft golden light, was pitch black except for a single wall sconce flickering near the stairs. I started walking up toward the observation deck, thinking maybe she wanted to stargaze. As I climbed the last staircase, I heard something that made me stop. Footsteps, quick and light, on the deck above me. I called out again. "Lisa?" The footsteps stopped. I reached the top and looked around. No one. The deck was slick with dew, and the night sky was heavy with clouds. I walked to the railing and scanned the dark ocean. There was no moon, just endless, churning blackness. Then I heard it. A soft hum, like someone was singing or humming a lullaby just around the corner, near the lifeboats. It was high-pitched, almost like a child's voice, but I couldn't make out the tune. I should have gone back to the cabin, but instead, I followed the sound. When I reached the source, the humming stopped. There was no one there, just rows of lifeboats and coiled ropes. I took one more step, and suddenly the cold slammed into me again. Same unnatural cold as before. My fingers went numb instantly. The metal railing I touched burned with the chill. I turned around fast and started walking back toward the stairs. That's when I saw her. Not Lisa. Someone else. A woman in a blue dress standing just beyond the glass door that led to the stairwell. She was barefoot, hair soaked and hanging in clumps, her skin so pale it almost glowed. I stopped walking. She raised one hand and pointed, not at me, but toward the ocean behind me. I turned. There was nothing there. When I turned back, the woman was gone. I practically ran back to our cabin. Lisa was there, asleep in her bed. I shook her awake and asked where she had gone. She frowned and said she'd been asleep the whole time. I told her the door had been open earlier, and she just mumbled, "You probably dreamed it," and rolled over. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I went to the front desk to ask if the ship had any kind of medical bay, thinking maybe I hallucinated something from being overtired. The attendant, a thin woman with watery eyes, barely looked at me. She handed me a map and said nothing. As I walked away, I noticed a locked door near the elevators with a faded sign, "Restricted area, crew only." Something about the way the hall curved around that spot made my skin crawl. I asked a crew member what was back there, and he simply said, "Storage, maintenance." On the second night, things escalated. Lisa and I were in the dining room when we noticed the lights flickering, only over our table. The couple next to us didn't seem to notice, nor did the waiter. Then I saw something move behind Lisa. I blinked, thinking it was a shadow, but it looked like someone walking quickly behind her chair. When I looked again, there was no one there. Later, in the hallway outside our cabin, we heard a knock. Not on our door, on the one across from us, which had remained unoccupied since we boarded. The knock came again. Lisa went to look through the peephole, and then she turned to me, face pale. "There's a man just standing there," she whispered, "facing the door. Not knocking now, just standing." I looked. She was right. A tall man in a dark suit was standing with his back to us, facing the unoccupied cabin door. His hands were at his sides, and he didn't move. We stood frozen for what felt like minutes. Then, without turning, he walked away, slowly down the corridor, disappearing around a corner. We reported it. A crew member came up, looked around, and said there was no sign of anyone. Lisa asked if the other cabin was in use. The crew member hesitated and said, "No, that section's being renovated. No guests are assigned there." That night, the rotary phone in our room rang at 3:17 a.m. I answered it, static. Then a voice. A woman's voice, faint and trembling. "Don't go to deck 3, she whispered. "Don't let them in." Then the line went dead. The next morning we asked around. The ship had no Deck 3 accessible to guests. The elevators skipped from 2 to 4. I asked a bartender casually, and he said, "Yeah, the third deck was sealed off years ago after a fire. No one goes down there." Fire? That wasn't mentioned in the brochure. That afternoon, Lisa got sick. Not seasick. Something else. She was shaking, pale, running a fever. The nurse said it was probably just a bug and gave her some anti-nausea meds. I stayed with her in the room, trying to watch movies on my phone. Around midnight, she started murmuring in her sleep. She kept repeating the same thing. "It's cold. It's so cold. Don't let them in." I shook her awake, and she stared at me like she didn't know who I was. Her lips were blue. I wrapped her in blankets and sat with her until she finally fell into deeper sleep. Sometime after 2 a.m., I heard something under the bed. It wasn't a mouse or a creak. It was a voice, whispering. It said my name. I froze, blood draining from my face. I got down on the floor and slowly lifted the edge of the bed skirt. There was nothing, just darkness. And then a hand shot out. I screamed and scrambled back. Lisa woke up with a start as I crashed into the dresser, but when she turned on the light, there was nothing there. We reported it again. This time, the crew member looked exhausted, like he'd heard it all before. He didn't write anything down. He just said, "Stay in your room at night. Don't answer the phone. Don't go exploring." The final night, I couldn't sleep. I sat near the porthole, watching the endless black ocean. Around 3 a.m., the phone rang again. I didn't answer it. The ringing stopped after 10 or 11 tones. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, dragging footsteps. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was full of people, but they weren't alive. They were pale, soaking wet, some with burns across their skin. Men and women in old cruise attire, tuxedos, ball gowns, uniforms. They moved slowly, aimlessly, eyes vacant. They walked past our room, one by one, disappearing into the unoccupied cabin across from us. I counted at least 20. When the last one passed, the door across the hall slammed shut. I stayed at the peephole until dawn. When we finally disembarked, Lisa and I didn't say anything for a while. It wasn't until the cab ride back from the port that she finally whispered, "I saw them too." I nodded. We never spoke of it again. Weeks later, I tried to look up the Maribel. I found an article buried in an archive about a fire on board in 1973. A faulty electrical panel had sparked flames on Deck 3 during a formal ball. Over 40 people died. Some burned, others drowned after jumping overboard in panic. The ship was salvaged and sold to a new cruise line that never publicly acknowledged the tragedy. They just sealed off Deck 3 and renamed the boat. But I think the ones who died never left. I think they're still on board, walking those narrow halls, knocking on locked doors, trying to finish a voyage that never ended. Story the end.
Story number 4.
It was supposed to be a last-minute vacation. Nothing extravagant, just a 3-night cruise from Miami to Cozumel and back. I booked it through a flash deal site, those packages that make you wonder how they're even profitable. My cousin Alicia had bailed the night before due to a family emergency, so I ended up boarding the ship alone. I figured I'd make the best of it. I'd heard that solo travel can be liberating. The ship was called the Ocean Serenity. Massive, sleek, sparkling with polished chrome and thickly carpeted corridors that muffled footsteps almost completely. The lobby glowed with a kind of golden artificial warmth, framed by twin staircases and a chandelier that probably wasn't real crystal, but still looked impressive. Staff in white uniforms moved gracefully through the crowd of passengers, always smiling. Everything was designed to make you feel like royalty, even if you paid like a peasant. My cabin was on Deck 9, starboard side. Not a balcony room, just a porthole. Still, the view was decent, and the room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and salt air. I unpacked, took a shower, and headed for the welcome dinner in the ship's main dining room. That first night passed without incident. Too much wine, awkward small talk with a pair of honeymooners from Ohio, and a slight seasickness that passed by morning. It wasn't until the second night that things began to feel wrong. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up, not with a start, but with a kind of soft, unexplained awareness. I hadn't had any nightmares, and there were no loud noises that might have pulled me from sleep. I simply opened my eyes and felt cold. My porthole window looked out on utter blackness. No stars, no distant shoreline lights, just the void of the sea at night. But I could hear something faint, So faint that at first I thought it was just the air conditioner acting up. It was a tapping, rhythmic, not fast, not slow, just consistent. I sat up in bed, the sheets slipping from my legs. The tapping continued. I turned on the bedside light and walked toward the porthole. The tapping was louder now, undeniably coming from the window itself. I leaned closer and realized with a ripple of unease that it sounded exactly like fingers tapping on the glass. I stared into the dark, my breath fogging a small circle on the window. Nothing out there. I tapped the glass myself, trying to recreate the sound. Mine was sharper, quicker. The original tapping had stopped. I stood there a long moment, waiting for something else to happen. A rational explanation flickered through my head. Water condensation shifting in temperature, maybe? But that didn't explain the distinct rhythm. After a few more minutes, I shook it off and went back to bed. Eventually, I slept. The next morning, I stopped by the guest services desk and mentioned the noise. The attendant, a man named Brent, smiled politely and said, "The porthole windows sometimes made odd sounds depending on sea conditions. They expand and contract with the temperature," he said, "kind of like old pipes." It was plausible enough, but the uneasiness lingered. That afternoon, I explored more of the ship. Casino, gym, pool deck. I ended up in the library, a quiet little room near the stern with deep leather chairs and a collection of dog-eared paperbacks. There, I met a woman named Eleanor, probably in her early 60s, with snow-white hair in a tight bun and a floral blouse buttoned to the throat. She had a weathered hardback open in her lap and gave me a smile when I walked in. "First cruise?" she asked, without preamble. I nodded. "Yeah, how could you tell?" "You still look like you're waiting for the floor to move," she said, chuckling. "You get used to it by day 3. She told me she was a retired school teacher, now spending her savings on travel. "I've been on the Ocean Serenity 4 times, she said. "Last time was 2 years ago. That was the trip with the incident." "What incident?" Her face changed slightly. Less animated, more reserved. She looked at the spine of her book as if weighing something. "A man disappeared," she said finally. "Cabin 937, I'll never forget it. They said he fell overboard, but I'm not so sure." My stomach nodded. "That's the deck I'm on," I said. "I'm in 934. Her lips pursed. "Do you know what happened?" She nodded slowly. "It was the second night, same as you are now. He was seen at dinner, chatting with the waiter. Went back to his room afterward, but when they did room checks the next morning, he was gone. His bed had been slept in. His luggage was still there. Passport, wallet, everything. They never found a trace." I tried to play it cool, but my skin tingled. "And they said he fell overboard?" That's the official story. Security footage was inconclusive. Apparently, one of the hallway cameras lost power between 2 and 4 a.m. That was the time window they narrowed it down to. I couldn't stop thinking about the tapping. That night, I locked the cabin door and left the light on. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried distracting myself with a movie, but the ship's Wi-Fi was spotty and nothing would load. Eventually, I drifted off, light still glowing. I woke again at 2:27 a.m. The tapping had returned. It was slightly faster this time. 5 taps, pause, then 5 more. I sat up, heart racing. The porthole was still dark. I got out of bed and stood next to it, trying to see if the rhythm would change. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 tap. I whispered, "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped instantly. I waited, barely breathing. Then scrape, a long, slow scrape against the glass. I jerked backward. My mind was flipping through explanations, none of which made any logical sense. The window was 12 feet above the waterline. Even if someone had been swimming out there, an absurd idea, they couldn't have reached the window. Not without equipment, not in the middle of the night. I backed into the bathroom and shut the door, turning on the light. I stayed there for the rest of the night, sitting on the closed toilet seat with a towel over my shoulders. By breakfast, I looked like hell. I tried talking to one of the staff again, but they were less friendly this time. Guarded, almost rehearsed. "We assure you, all exterior windows are secure. There is no cause for concern." I saw Eleanor again in the library and told her what happened. She listened, expressionless, then said, "There's more than one story about this ship. You know, like what?" "Well, the Ocean Serenity wasn't originally called that. It used to be the Mariposa Dawn. Back in the late 90s, it had a different owner. There was an accident, A fire in the engine room which spread. One of the lower decks flooded when the sprinkler system triggered at the wrong time. 6 people died, all crew. One of them, his name was Andres Salinas, was a maintenance worker. According to rumor, he was sealing up a porthole during rough seas and got trapped when the water started flooding in. I felt ice crawl up my spine. She continued, "They say the company changed the ship's name and covered up the worst of it. Refitted it, rebranded. But every few years, something happens. Someone vanishes." I didn't want to hear anymore, but I couldn't stop listening. "Sometimes people hear knocking," she said. "Scratching. Always around the second night. Always cabins along the starboard side." My cabin. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a small bag and tried to switch rooms, but they told me the ship was fully booked. I asked to sleep in one of the lounges or even the infirmary. They said it wasn't allowed. So I stayed. I left the bathroom light on again and sat upright in bed with a metal flashlight in one hand. I planned to record any sounds on my phone if they started again. They did. Right on time. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. I turned on the recorder and held my breath. The tapping shifted position as if moving along the glass. Then came the scratching again, slow, deliberate, like nails across a blackboard. I whispered, "Go away." And the sound stopped. But then the handle to my cabin door jiggled. I jumped. The door was locked. I double-checked, but the handle kept moving, softly, as if someone was testing it. I tiptoed to the door, holding the flashlight like a weapon. I looked through the peephole. No one there. But I heard something. A breath. Not mine, wet and wheezing like someone gasping through a flooded throat. I backed away, and the light above me flickered. The air grew thicker, damper. I felt a sudden pressure in my ears like I was underwater. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a notification. The voice recorder app had crashed. No file saved. Something behind me creaked. I spun around. The porthole was open. It shouldn't have been possible. Those windows are sealed tight, not meant to open. But mine was swung outward slightly, enough to let in a thread of salt-tinged air. And there, wet handprints on the carpet, leading away from the window toward the bathroom. I ran. I didn't even grab my shoes. I just yanked open the door and sprinted down the corridor, pounding on the night attendant's desk until someone came. I was frantic, babbling about ghosts and open windows. The staff took me aside, spoke in low tones, and brought me to a small office where I waited for security. The officer who came in was middle-aged, tired-looking, and calm. He asked me to tell the story again. I did. When I mentioned the porthole being open, his expression changed for just a second. Something flickering behind his eyes. "There's no mechanism to open those windows," he said. "You must have imagined it." "I have pictures," I said, pulling out my phone. But the battery had died. When I returned to the cabin with security, the window was closed. No handprints. No dampness. Nothing. I knew what I'd seen. The final night of the cruise, I stayed in one of the poolside deck chairs, wrapped in towels and dozing fitfully. I didn't go back to that cabin. We docked at Miami around noon the next day. I was among the first to disembark. When I got home, I checked the voice recorder app. There was no saved file, but when I plugged the phone into my laptop and browsed the internal folders, I found a corrupted audio file with a timestamp of 2:29 a.m. on that second night. I opened it with an audio editor. It was mostly static, but around the 18-second mark, I heard it clearly. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. And then, so faint I had to boost the gain 3 times, came a voice. Wet. Gurgling. Just one word. Cold. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The first time I ever set foot on a cruise ship, I was 28, freshly promoted, and in desperate need of a break. I had just finished a grueling stretch at work, working 12-hour days and pulling weekends for a product launch that almost tanked. So when my friend Liz convinced me to join her on a week-long Caribbean cruise aboard the Emerald Voyager, I gave in. The ship was massive, 15 decks, multiple restaurants, spas, pools, and entertainment venues. From the outside, it looked like a floating city. The first 2 days went by like a dream. I sipped cocktails by the pool, danced under the stars, and slept with my balcony door open, letting the ocean air lull me to sleep. On the third night, I woke up just before 3 a.m. to the sound of something knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I groggily sat up, heart already racing. I thought maybe Liz had come back drunk from one of the bars and forgotten her key card. But when I checked the peephole, the hallway was empty. I opened the door anyway, looking left and right. Nothing. Not even the sound of footsteps fading down the corridor. I closed the door and got back into bed. Maybe it had been someone knocking on another cabin door. I convinced myself it was nothing. The next day, Liz joked about the ghost stories she'd read online about cruise ships. Apparently, every large ship has its fair share of death. People falling overboard, heart attacks, freak accidents. She mentioned that the Emerald Voyager was nearly 15 years old and had a few urban legends floating around on forums. I laughed it off at the time. Ghosts? I didn't believe in that stuff. But something about the night before stuck with me. That evening, we went to the onboard theater to watch a show. I excused myself halfway through and went back to the cabin. I don't remember what compelled me, just an unshakable feeling of needing to be alone. My cabin, 9473, was on deck 9 toward the rear of the ship, and that corridor always seemed slightly colder than the rest of the vessel. I chalked it up to bad ventilation. As I entered, the lights flickered. I paused, key card still in the slot, then they steadied. The room felt a few degrees colder than it had that morning. I wrapped a towel around my shoulders, checked the thermostat, and frowned. It was set to 72 grease factors, but it felt closer to 60. Then I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. Only this time they came from inside the room. I froze. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it like that. "Liz?" I called out, knowing she wasn't there. No response. I walked cautiously toward the bathroom and nudged the door open. Nothing. The light inside was off. I turned it on and scanned the space. Empty. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard whispering, low, unintelligible sounds like someone speaking just beneath the threshold of understanding. At one point, I swore I felt the edge of the bed dip as though someone had sat beside me. But when I turned on the light, no one was there. The next morning, I asked Liz if she'd heard anything weird in her room. She hadn't. In fact, she'd gotten a full 8 hours for the first time since the trip started. I didn't want to say anything else. I didn't want to be the paranoid one. That afternoon, I went down to the front desk and asked casually if anything strange had ever happened in cabin 9473. The staff member, a woman in her late 40s with bright red lipstick, paused for a moment, smiled, and said, "Not that I know of." But there was a flicker in her eyes, a slight stiffness in her smile that made my stomach drop. She knew something. That night, Liz and I had dinner at the steakhouse on deck 11. We ordered wine, tried to keep things light, but I kept checking my phone, dreading going back to that room. Finally, I admitted to her what had happened. The knocking, the cold, the whispers. She didn't laugh. Instead, she said, "I didn't want to freak you out, but I read something online before we got on the ship. Someone posted about a woman who disappeared from a cabin on deck 9. They were on the same cruise line, same ship, and her cabin number was only a few digits away from yours." "What do you mean disappeared?" I asked. "She went missing one night. No one saw her again. The cameras showed her walking down the corridor toward her cabin, but not leaving. They never found her." I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a hoax. The internet is full of attention seekers, but something about it, especially after what I'd experienced, rattled me. That night, I asked the staff for a different room. They were polite, but told me the ship was at full capacity. Back in 9473, I left all the lights on. I packed my bag just in case I needed to leave in the middle of the night. I even left the door ajar, putting the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the handle to prevent housekeeping from walking in. At around 2:45 a.m., I heard the shower turn on by itself. I ran to the bathroom. Steam billowed out even though I hadn't touched the faucet. I turned the handle off and backed away slowly. As I reached the door to leave the room, it slammed shut, from the inside. I stood there, heart pounding in my throat, unsure what to do. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, waving it around the room. That's when I saw the fog on the mirror. A single handprint had appeared. It wasn't mine. I bolted. I ran barefoot down the hall in my pajamas, pounding on Liz's door. She let me in without a word. I slept on her floor that night. The next morning, I returned to 9473 with Liz. Everything looked normal. My packed bag was still on the bed. The shower was dry. The mirror was clean. But I wasn't imagining it. I knew I wasn't. We went to the concierge and demanded to know what had happened in that room. After some persistence and involvement of a more senior staff member, they finally admitted that yes, there had been an incident. 7 years earlier, a woman named Kayla Densmore had gone missing from that very room. She had been traveling alone. Witnesses said she was acting strangely in the days before her disappearance. Paranoid, tired, convinced someone was following her. Her final appearance was captured on security footage walking down the corridor to 9473. She was never seen again. Her belongings were found untouched. The door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No one else had access. Authorities assumed she either jumped or fell overboard, but no body was ever found. When I asked why the room was still in circulation, the staff member simply said, "We're not in the business of fueling rumors. It's a coincidence. That's all." I switched cabins. They found a last-minute cancellation and put me on deck 5. I slept better, though never completely peacefully. The rest of the trip passed without incident, though I kept to public areas, avoided being alone, and refused to go anywhere near Deck 9. After disembarking, I started doing more research. I found the forum Liz had mentioned. There were dozens of posts about the Emerald Voyager, strange sounds, cold spots, sudden feelings of dread, especially around certain rooms on Deck 9. Cabin 9473 came up multiple times. Some claimed to have seen a woman's figure standing on the balcony at night, staring out to sea, even when the room was unoccupied. A few weeks later, back in my apartment, I received a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I plugged it into my laptop. There was only one file, 9473.move. I opened it. The footage was grainy, black and white, clearly from an old surveillance system. It showed a corridor, Deck 9, if I had to guess. A timestamp in the corner read 0301 a.m. A woman stepped into frame. She had shoulder-length dark hair and wore a nightgown. She moved slowly, as if in a trance. She stopped in front of a door and knocked 3 times. Then she turned around and looked directly into the camera. My blood ran cold. It was me. I closed the laptop so fast it nearly cracked. I hadn't sleepwalked. I was certain I hadn't left the room that night. And yet, there I was, walking down the corridor at 3 a.m., knocking on a cabin door just like someone had done to mine. I don't know how to explain it. I've tried everything: hypnosis, sleep studies, therapy. No one has answers. All I know is that something followed me off that ship. The knocking hasn't stopped. Every few weeks, no matter where I am, I hear it again. 3 slow knocks on the window, on the door, on the wall behind my bed. Always at 3 a.m. Story the end.